Hello and welcome to this Foster Care Institute online training webinar. Mandated Reporting, Protecting Children from Harm. I'm your host, Dr. John DeGarmo, the founder and director of the Foster Care Institute. I also serve as an author of several foster care related books, an international speaker and trainer, and I have been a foster, adoptive, and biological parent. Through the years, my wife and I have seen the responsibilities firsthand of what it is to be a mandated reporter. Along with this, my role as a teacher in years gone by, I have also seen and recognized the importance and the roles and responsibilities of a mandated reporter. Our goal during this Foster Care Institute training webinar is to bring awareness to the role and the responsibilities of mandated reporters. Our key objectives during this webinar is to increase your awareness of what a mandated reporter is and understanding of the responsibilities you may have as a mandated reporter, as well as how to file a report and when to file a report. There are children in crisis all around us at all times. Statistically, on any given year in the United States of America, roughly 5 million children witness or experience domestic violence or domestic abuse in their own homes. There are 800,000 children missing every year in the United States. Roughly 450,000 children are in the foster care system. And we have, in some estimates, 300,000 children who are victims of child sex trafficking, again, each year in the United States of America. So it is quite easy to see, quite clear to see, that there are children who are suffering, children in need, and children in crisis in every state, in every city, in every community. Make no mistake, there are children who are suffering and children in crisis around you. Children need someone to speak on their behalf. And that's what mandated reporters do. Yet there are many misconceptions about just who might be a mandated reporter. So before we go any further, let's look and see who will serve as a mandated reporter. Perhaps the most viable mandated reporter is that of a teacher. Because a teacher is oftentimes the one adult in a child's life that spends perhaps the most amount of time with them during their waking hours. Monday through Friday during the school year, a teacher most likely will spend the most amount of time with a child, again, during the child's waking hours. And a child may spend most of their time with a teacher while a child is being abused or neglected. A teacher has the opportunity to see that abuse and neglect because a child is spending a lot of time with that teacher and vice versa. So again, perhaps the one adult in a child's life that can help as a mandated reporter is a teacher. But who else makes up a mandated reporter? Who else serves as a mandated reporter? Foster parents absolutely serve as mandated reporters. As a foster parent, when you have children in your home who are suffering from abuse and neglect and abandonment, and you see something, you have the responsibility as a mandated reporter to file a report. We will look at this, how to file a report, later on during this webinar. But there are others who also serve as mandated reporters. School counselors do. Coaches, whether they are coaching during the school and through the school or coaching through intramural programs, coaches serve as mandated reporters. Instructional aides and teachers' assistants are also mandated reporters. There are more. School administrators are mandated reporters. Psychologists and therapists also are mandated reporters. A medical examiner is a mandated reporter. A coroner is a mandated reporter. Healthcare employees also serve as mandated reporters. And there are more. Clergy, priests, ministers, rabbis, and any spiritual leader, these are mandated reporters. Those employees with a social service agency and have contact with children are mandated reporters. Any member of law enforcement, including a district attorney and including an attorney general, are also mandated reporters. Employees of a public library also serve as mandated reporters. Now, according to the Public Welfare Code from June 13, 1967, this is a mandated reporter. An adult family member who is a person responsible for the child's welfare and provides services to a child in a family living home, community home for individuals with intellectual disability, or host home for children who are subject to supervision or licensure by the department. These people serve as mandated reporters. And let's look at the beginning of that one more time. An adult family member who is a person responsible for the child's welfare and provides services to a child in a family living home. These are mandated reporters. So we see that there are many people who serve and have the responsibility of mandated reporters. But what are those responsibilities? Well, a mandated reporter is required to file a report if he or she suspects that a child is a victim of abuse or neglect under the following conditions. We shall look at those conditions coming up. Before we do, though, mandated reporters who have contact with a child through their work in a school setting, a regularly scheduled program or an activity or service, they have the responsibility of filing a report. Mandated reporter is responsible for the child or works for the child agency. They are responsible for filing a report. Mandated reporter is informed in regards to the disclosure about a specific identifiable child. They have the responsibility of filing a report. Now, this slide is important. The child does not have to come to you or speak to you, approach you, in order for you to file a report. Child in question does not have to come before or speak to the mandated reporter in order for the reporter to file a report. Once again, the child does not have to come to you in order for you to responsibly file that report. A mandated reporter shall make a report when, in his or her professional capacity, has knowledge of or observes a child whom you might know or reasonably suspect has been the victim of child abuse or neglect. One more time, a mandated reporter shall make a report when, in his or her professional capacity, has knowledge of or observes a child whom he or she knows or reasonably suspects has been the victim of child abuse or neglect. If you know or suspect that a child is being abused or neglected, it is your responsibility to file that report. Now, a mandated reporter must not try to determine whether the abuse has happened. It is not your responsibility to determine whether or not the abuse has happened. You are not the investigator. It is not your responsibility to investigate the case, to find out information. You do not have to determine whether the abuse actually has happened. So don't ask questions about what's happened. Don't ask questions about who may have done it. Don't ask questions about where it may have happened. Beyond reaching the approach of reasonable cause to suspect the child has been abused. So if you have reasonable cause, if you reasonably believe the child has been abused in some way, you do not need to determine where the abuse happened, when the abuse happened. You're not the investigator. You have, though, the responsibility of filing that report based upon your reasonable cause. What does reasonable suspicion mean, though? Well, reasonable suspicion means it is objectively reasonable for a person to entertain, to have some type of suspicion, to believe, if you will, based upon some type of facts that cause you, as a reasonable person, to draw upon your experience to suspect the child has been abused or neglected. Now, you as a foster parent or as a caseworker, you have had training about what child abuse and neglect might look like. So thus, this means this. If you suspect the child has been abused in some fashion based upon the facts you've been given, based upon your training and experience, it is your responsibility to file that report. Again, based on, here, reasonable suspicion. According to the Penal Code, reasonable suspicion does not require your absolute certainty, 100% certainty that child abuse or neglect has occurred. You do not have to be positive about this. You just have to have that reasonable suspicion. It also means a specific medical indication of child abuse or neglect. You do not have to have that specific medical indication that child has been abused or neglected. You have to have reasonable suspicion. Again, it does not require 100% certainty child has been abused or neglected and proof of medical and indication of abuse or neglect. Now, you may be asking yourself, okay, I understand what what a mandated reporter is, who they are. I understand what my responsibilities are and are not. Now I ask myself, what do I report? Well, what do you report? A mandated reporter should file a report when he sees signs of abuse and neglect. Now, we go back earlier to the slide. We talked about what that might look like. What do you report? Well, you report sexual abuse. If you believe, remember, you do not have to have 100% certainty here. You have to have reasonable suspicion. Reasonable suspicion of sexual abuse. Reasonable suspicion of physical abuse or even death that is not accidental in nature. Reasonable suspicion that someone is purposely harming a child in any way whatsoever. Reasonable suspicion that a child is being endangered. Reasonable suspicion that there's being some sort of corporal punishment that is illegal, that is not lawful, portrayed upon a child. So what does abuse look like? If you suspect a child might be being abused in some way, what might that abuse look like? Well, signs of abuse may include marks on surface of body. If you see marks on surfaces of body and you have some type of reasonable suspicion that it's coming from an adult in a domestic violence type of way, it's your responsibility to report it. Other signs of abuse may include unexplained bruises or welts on a child's body, maybe even bite marks, even as far as bald spots on a child's head. Unexplained burns, especially cigarette or immersion style burns. Now, on a personal note, if you've read some of my books, you know that I've had children in my own home who have been burned with cigarettes. Those unexplained burns. Did we report it? Absolutely, we did. Signs of abuse may also include a child who might become afraid when adults approach the child. Other forms of abuse might look like a child being withdrawn or overly aggressive. When a child might be afraid, scared to return home, to go back home, that might be an indication that abuse is happening within that house. When a child overreacts to even the simplest of accidents. When a child creates an accident, maybe breaks a glass, spills a bottle, knocks over a jar, whatever it might be, and they overreact to that simple accident, that could be an indication right there that there may be some sort of abuse happening in the household. Those children who are unwilling to talk about home life and their family members and parents could be a sign that abuse is happening in the household. Finally, those children who are not dressed for weather, perhaps they do not have warm weather clothing when it is cold outside, jackets, boots, hats, scarves, whatever it might be, or they do not have weather clothing for when it's raining, etc. That could be a sign, could be an indication that there might be child abuse in some fashion. Again, it is not your responsibility to have 100% certainty to file a report. You have to have reasonable suspicion. Now, we've looked at abuse, but what does sexual abuse look like? We know that many children are abused sexually in the home. What does that sexual abuse look like? Those children who complain of itching or pain in the genitalia area might be a sign that sexual abuse is happening in the household. Bloody, stained, or torn underwear and undergarments is also a sign that there could be sexual abuse. Children who suffer from venereal disease is often a sign of sexual abuse. Those children who are frequently urinating, could be a sign that there is sexual abuse. Bruises or bleeding from the genital area is also a sign that there may be sexual abuse happening upon the child. Children with yeast infections, children reporting sexual abuse upon themselves, signs of sexual abuse. Those children who have lack of confidence with themselves, who lack confidence about themselves, just have a low self-esteem, if you will, could be a sign that there is sexual abuse happening. Those children who have knowledge far beyond their years, far beyond their age group of sexual acts, sexual information, if you will, often a sign a child may be being abused sexually. Children who are withdrawn could also be a sign of sexual abuse. Those children who experience bedwetting, particularly those children who are older, could be a sign of sexual abuse. Children who have trouble sleeping, afraid to go to sleep, can also be signs of sexual abuse. Finally, those children who have symptoms of chronic depression, often a sign of sexual abuse happening within the household. Now we've looked at abuse, we've looked at sexual abuse. What does neglect look like? Remember, as a mandated reporter, you have to have reasonable suspicion of neglect. But what does that neglect look like? Severe neglect is the negligent failure of a person having the care or custody of a child to protect the child from severe malnutrition or medically diagnosed non-organic failure to thrive. It also encompasses situations where any person having care or custody of a child willfully causes or permits endangerment of the child's person or health. General neglect is a negligent failure of a person having the care or custody of a child to provide adequate food, clothing, shelter, medical care, or supervision where no physical injury to the child has occurred. And both these slides come to us from the Penal Code section 11165.2. So, with that in mind, what does neglect look like? Neglect may be the lack of supervision in a consistent fashion for the child. The child does not get consistent day to day supervision. The supervision of the child is done in an inconsistent manner. Neglect may be the medical needs of the child not being met. Those children who are stealing food in some sort of survival mode, if you will, this may be a sign a child is being neglected. Again, those children who are asking or begging for food also is a sign that neglect may be there. Children who suffer from their own substance abuse problems. This can be a sign, a strong sign, a child is being neglected. Children who are physically delayed developmentally, they have that physical development that's delayed, is a sign of neglect. We've seen withdrawn, previous slides. Those children who are withdrawn may be a sign of neglect. Those children who act out in aggressive fashion, aggressive behavior, if you will, is a sign of neglect. Those children who are tired, worn out, exhausted, sleepy, day to day, week to week, month to month, in a consistent fashion can be a sign that they're being neglected. Those children who their bodies are emancipated. Those children who have sleep disorders. These are signs that neglect may be there. So with all this, what is the timeline, if you will, to report? You suspect, you have that reasonable suspicion the child is suffering from abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, the child is being neglected. You have that reasonable suspicion. You're not 100% sure, because remember, you do not have to have that certainty, yet you have that reasonable suspicion. Question next is, when do you report it? Well, as a mandated reporter, you have a timeline that you must adhere to. As a mandated reporter, and you have reason to believe, a reasonable suspicion, if you will, you have reason to believe that a child is in danger, the report should be made immediately. Again, you do not have to have proof. You do not have to have evidence in order to file the report. You have to have that reasonable suspicion. So with that in mind, when you have that reasonable suspicion, you believe their life is in danger in some regard, you make the report immediately. Some states dictate that a report must be made within 24 hours. After you have that reasonable suspicion, you have the reason to believe the child is in danger, you have to file the report within 24 hours. Some other states might dictate that this report be made within 24 to 48 hours. So you need to find out your state's requirements, your state's procedures in this fashion, and follow this. If your state mandates that a report be made within 24 hours, you need to adhere to this. If your state has 24 to 48 hours, you fall into this category. Again, ask your state, ask your caseworker, ask your agency. A quick search online. These will all answer that question of when do you have to make that report. But keep this in mind. Keep this in mind. A child's life may depend upon how fast you act. If you wait the 24 to 48 hours, that child's life may be in danger as a result. Their life may be in danger as a result. For some children, in some situations, 24 hours might be too late as well. Remember, a child's life may depend upon how fast you act. You may be asking yourself, but what if I make a mandated report and I'm wrong? What if I had this belief that a child's being abused or neglected and I file a report and it comes out that there was no abuse, there was no neglect, I was mistaken? Am I liable? No. Mandated reporters are not liable. You are not liable if a report that you have made is not substantiated. You are protected from liability as a mandated reporter. But keep this in mind. If, as a mandated reporter, you do not file a report, yet you have knowledge, you committed a crime. Again, let me read this. If a mandated report and has suspicion does not file that report, you've committed a crime. Now, the punishment may depend upon the state's policies. There may be a fine or even prison may result. So thus you can see the importance. If you have that reasonable suspicion, you must report it, not only for the safety of the child, but also for your own liability. But remember, if you make a mistake and the child is safe and there's been no harm, you are not liable for that. You are liable for not filing a report. And therein lies the difference. How to file a report? What do you need to do in order to file that report? You have your reasonable suspicion. You feel you need to file this report now. How do you do it? Quite simply, you pick up the phone and you call your local child welfare agency and or the police. If you do not reach anybody, if you do not reach your local child welfare agency, you do not reach the police, you are receiving answer machines of some kind or voice messages, you then call 911. Now, whoever you should get a hold of, you let them know that you are acting and serving as a mandated reporter for a child. So you file the written report within the time frame that is allotted to you. You call up and then you file a written report. You make sure you have a copy of the written documentation that you filed. You write down what you believe is happening to this child. You write down your reasonable suspicion. If you believe the child is being sexually abused, you write this down and give any indication of why you might feel this is. If a child is being physically abused, you write this down and you write down why you believe this to be the case. Child's neglected, again, you document this and you write down why you believe this to be the case. You keep a written record. You keep written documentation, if you will, of anything that you may have written and filed. When you speak to somebody, you record the time and the date and the name of the person that you spoke to on the phone in case there should be any questions asked about it. When you are talking to somebody on the phone, be prepared for questions. Be prepared for the person on the other end of the phone to ask you questions. These questions could be lengthy. These questions may include your name, your employer's name, your address, your phone number, the name, the date of birth, or the approximate age, the sex of the child. If you're not sure the child's age, your best guess. If you know the child's present location, you give that as well. The people on the other end of the phone may ask you where the child goes to school or daycare information, including the time they should be dismissed from school or daycare. Specific details and the nature, the extent of the abuse. They may ask you to give details about the child's abuse that you suspect. Be descriptive as possible. If you suspect if you've seen some bruises in the child or cuts or marks or burns, you give the location of the injury, the size, the color, the pattern, the shape. You indicate where and when the incident occurred in your belief. You indicate whether there's a risk of further abuse or imminent danger in your opinion. They may ask you who the child lives with, or the name and the address of the parents or caretakers. Other questions they may ask you to give the name, date, and birth, approximate age, the address, phone number, and relationship to the child victim of the person you suspect is abusing or neglecting the child. So you had that information handy if you have that. Also, include, if possible, the present location of this person, the abuser, and whether or not the abuser is currently with the child or currently has access to the child. You may be asked to name the names, the ages, the schools, the other children in the home, not just the child or the siblings. You may be asked about the child's family language or ethnicity. You may be asked about the knowledge of any previous CPS history or other agencies involved with the family. When speaking to someone on the phone, you might be asked if there are any known previous counties or residents a child may be asked, because Child Protective Services will call them. You may be asked to make a note if photographs or x-rays were taken to your knowledge. You may be asked to try to quote exactly what was said by the child or the person accompanying the child. Use quotation marks and state what was speaking. Have information ready about the vulnerability of the child due to the age or disability. If a child is unrelated to the adult in the home, if you should know. You may be asked if there are any other children in the home under the age of 5. Finally, you may be asked if there are any drugs use suspected in the home or by the victim or even by the child itself. You may be asked if the child or the parent or caretaker or others in the home have a psychiatric history, or if you suspect they may have. You may be asked if there's a history of violence, whether it's domestic, child or animal abuse, or any other violent crimes in the home by the adult or the perpetrator. You may be asked if service organizations the family is involved with, or any services the family may benefit from, what the family strengths might be, or any other information requested. Be ready to have all of this information, if possible. And again, this is quite a bit, but knowledge is power. The more information you have, the stronger your report will be. And we thank the Child Abuse Prevention Center for this long list of questions. Please remember this. As a mandated reporter, you do not have to have 100% certainty that the child is being abused. You do not have to have 100% certainty the child is being neglected. You have to have reasonable suspicion. Please remember this. You have to file a report within 24 to 48 hours, depending upon where you live. Please remember this, to document everything that should transpire with your phone call and the written information, and keep a record of all of this. And finally, please remember this. The longer you wait, the possible greater risk to the child. The longer you wait, the possible child's life may be at risk. So, if you suspect something, report it. If you suspect something, report it now. For more information about foster care, adoption, child welfare, child abuse, mandated reporting, visit the Foster Care Institute at drjohndegarmofostercare.com. For much more information, follow me on Facebook at Dr. John DeGarmo and Twitter at Dr. John DeGarmo. Email me about any questions you might have at drjohndegarmo@gmail.com. In the book, The Foster Care Survival Guide, we look at various forms of abuse, as well as various forms of neglect, as well as therapy as well, and so much more in the best-selling guide, The Foster Care Survival Guide. And this bestseller and several other best-selling foster care books can all be found at the Foster Care Institute. My friend, you are a mandated reporter. As you care for children in crisis and you care for children in need, whether in your home, whether as a caseworker or guardian ad litem or CASA, whether as an attorney or judge, whether as a law enforcer or a teacher, you are a mandated reporter. You have the responsibility of filing a report, and there may be a child who is depending that you do. So thank you for caring for children in need. And thank you for being part of this webinar. For the Foster Care Institute, I'm Dr. John DeGarmo.